Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the space. My name is Kelly, and today we are going to be addressing another topic of intersectionality, which I have been very excited to get to. We are talking today about the intersection between asexuality and gender. So, again, as a disclaimer, I just wanted to say that this research that I am presenting, again from the literature review that I made over the last couple months, which I mentioned in last week's video, the research that I have gathered is not representative of all the research that there is on the intersection of asexuality and gender. There is so much more research out there, but I am merely presenting my research findings as well as the discussion and thoughts that I had around this topic in general. So, to begin, I wanted to say that this research that I am presenting comes from Christina Gupta's qualitative study. And Christina studied gender and asexuality and discussed social expectations and relationships with sexuality. She pointed out gender stereotypes, and a big thing that we're going to be talking about today is the gender gap of male and female privilege when it comes to sexuality. So there seems to be something in Gupta's research that points to conflicts and also alignments with traditional stereotypes and traditional ideas about sexual roles and gender roles for men and women. For example, Gupta says, quote, "Men who identify as asexual may come into conflict with traditional notions of male heterosexuality," end quote. She goes on to describe that male socialized sexual identities are, quote, "ever present and animalistic," end quote. That is what they are socialized to present like. However, she says that by contrast, quote, "women who identify as asexual may actually fit with norms or may align with norms associated with femininity and sexual restraint," end quote. So here we see the gap. We see the gap between male conflict being male asexual identities coming in conflict with socialized norms about and socialized ideas about how male sexuality is supposed to present. But then also the difference with women and how their asexual identities may actually align with the socialized idea of chastity, modesty, and as Gupta says, quote, "femininity and sexual restraint," end quote. And so there is that, gap. There is a difference between how men and how women experience asexuality. Not only that, but experience sexuality in general. And when I was researching this, I found it really interesting to look at experiences from both a male and female side, because I have my experience moving through the world as an asexual woman. And I was so interested to hear about research and stories of what an asexual experience may look like from a man's perspective. And so Gupta's research focuses on that differentiated relationship, that differentiated experience between both men and women. For example, she actually interviewed people for the research that she did and said that some of the asexually identifying men felt that they had negative reactions to their asexuality, which somehow excluded them from a stereotypical idea or stereotypical socialized expectation of heteromasculinity. And again, on the flip side, some of the asexually identifying women that she interviewed felt that their asexuality was also rejected and negatively received because it aligned with feminine norms, socialized feminine norms that I would say has been in the public sector of being fought against, that women do not always have to be modest, that women do not have to follow those socialized sexual norms that were put upon them by patriarchal forces, such as, again, modesty, chastity. So the research that Gupta includes is just, I find it so interesting. And I think that, again, learning about male experience contrasted and compared with my female experience as an asexual person is important to elevating and highlighting the conversation around the intersectionality of asexuality and gender. Something really interesting, actually, that Gupta points to in her research is actually the privilege that men and women have, and how there is a gap there that bleeds into sexuality. And I never really thought about it from this perspective, but she says that some men in the study that she conducted, the people that she interviewed, while some of them felt negative social reactions to their asexuality, some also experienced acceptance of their asexuality due to masculine behavioral norms, I guess you could call them. And behavioral norms, in that way, Gupta is referring to male sexual freedom. Gupta claims that men have more freedom of their sexuality than women do. Now, I found this very interesting because I actually thought not necessarily the opposite, but I would not have expected that to be a find in her study. So she says that men experienced both negative reactions and acceptance of their asexuality due to the socialized expectations of heteromasculinity, as well as the privilege that masculine behavioral norms allows men. On the flip side, again, some women in the study experienced both negative reactions and acceptance of their asexuality due to its alignment with feminine behavioral norms. Thus, using this research, we again run into this idea that the socialized expectations of people's sexuality based off of gender norms and behavioral norms makes a great impact as to how people react and potentially accept one's sexuality. It also reflects their understanding of it. The same women's asexuality may be rejected for the same reason that it is accepted, because of the existence of the movement for women of sexual freedom, free of those norms, those patriarchal expectations around female sexuality, around virginity, around modesty, around sexual history. I mean, the list goes on. The piece that Gupta then asserts at the end of all this research, she claims that men may experience greater sexual freedom, both in engaging in sexual behavior and desiring a sexual relationship, as well as not desiring a sexual relationship and a lack thereof of sexual desire, because they are men. So I want to say that again. Gupta asserts that men are more privileged and have more freedom to either engage or disengage with sexuality And it is a freedom and a privilege that women do not have based off of patriarchal norms. And this was a really interesting point because I had never thought about it that way. I, of course, in learning about gender and asexuality and the intersecting qualities of that, the intersecting experiences, knew that women and men experienced sexuality differently. But I don't think my mind really connected the dots as to what Gupta is saying in terms of it coming from privilege and it coming from patriarchal norms, societal norms and expectations, and how one can be accepted and rejected for the exact same reasons. It was just so interesting to see that research and of course taking from my own lived experience, empathizing with that, echoing that sentiment that men and women experience sexuality differently. And that experience then defines their relationship with those societal norms and expectations. I think it is also important to mention that Gupta's research actually goes beyond just male and female relationships to asexuality and sexual identities, but also describes experiences from transgender and gender nonconforming identities around asexuality. The most interesting thing that Gupta shares is that, quote, asexually identifying individuals may feel less attached to aspects of gender because they are related to sexual scripts, end quote. So Gupta points out a pattern in how questions regarding gender, questions regarding gender identity, may also be closely intertwined with questions about sexual desire and sexual identity, because gender norms are so closely intertwined with sexual scripts. The norms and expectations, I think those are the buzzer words for today's episode. The norms and expectations around sexual activity from a male and female perspective are some of the defining qualities that are redefined by gender nonconforming and transgender individuals, breaking those barriers of what is socialized sexual norms, socialized sexual behavior. But with this, Gupta also recognizes that there may be a link between gender nonconforming identities and linked sexual stereotypes and assumptions. It may reflect what we have seen, such as in our last episode where we described how some identities are forcibly moved into asexual narratives because they are outside of socialized norms for race. The same then may be true for gender as well. Those whose identities lay outside of socialized gender norms may also then be forced into an asexual identity, or may be assumed to be asexual because of their socially non-conforming ways of experiencing gender identity. However, the presence of forced asexual scripts does not by any means invalidate the experiences that transgender and gender nonconforming asexual individuals have at all. Asexuality, regardless of how you identify or regardless of who you are or how you express yourself, is a fulfilling way of life. And so the intersection of asexuality and race really started us on this journey of, okay, what are stereotypes that we see not only in race but also in gender, and continuing down as we have more episodes regarding discussions around these types of topics. And it provides us with vocab terms to then be applied down the line and see, okay, we see that the intersectionality of different identities bleed into each other and are so multi-layered that sometimes they are impossible to distinguish, yet they all provide different experiences of living in the world. And so where do we go from here? Okay, so we know that men and women experience asexuality differently. Transgender and gender nonconforming people experience asexuality differently. Where do we go from here? And I think the answer may be very similar to the answer that we had last episode. The best thing we can do is talk about it. Sometimes the only thing we can do is talk about it. We can talk about our different experiences, our different relationships that we've had with societal norms, social expectations, and how what we think of them, how we've dealt with them, how we have triumphed against them time and time again. I mean, there's so much discussion that can be had around these intersecting topics alone, and why sharing research and bringing more than one voice into the conversation is so important, because there is no one way to experience sexuality. There is not one way for men, there is not one way for women, there is not one way for transgender people, there is not one way for gender nonconforming people. There is just not one way. Asexuality isn't even one way. It is multiple ways, many different ways that sometimes change a lot. And our experiences then with societal expectations will also change. By engaging in these conversations, by sharing our stories, and by noticing the places in which there may be struggle, points of conflict, and also points of victory, we can educate others, we can encourage others, we can invite others to sit with us and hear about yet another way to be human. And how amazing is that? What better gift is there to each other than sharing our different experiences of being human? So, again, this is such an interesting piece to me, such an interesting topic to be discussing, because I have always been interested about how different people experience life. More than that, how different people experience something that I am experiencing. From my limited perspective, what do other people see? What do other people feel? I think that is so, again, interesting and important and wonderful. And so I know in last episode I left you guys with a few questions at the end, more than what I did at the beginning. And the same question applies always, but let's switch it up a little bit more. Firstly, what is your favorite thing about your asexual identity? And what is your favorite thing about your identity in general? And then, even further, how does your favorite thing impact your life, and which part of you does that intersect with? Share with me your thoughts in the comments. I love to hear from you all. And I am so excited to see more and to hear more and to learn more and share all that I have learned with you guys. So thank you for joining me today, and we will see you next time here at the Space.